Welcome to the Steady On podcast, where God's hard truth meets your hard story. I'm Angie Bauman, and this is a super fun fiction-focused bonus episode with special guest, historical Christian fiction author Jennifer L. Wright. I absolutely loved my time with Jennifer. We talked about her new book, Come Down Somewhere, which launched into the world earlier this week if you happen to be listening to when this episode drops live on September 9th, 2022. Jennifer taught me about the Trinity bomb test in 1945, an event in our country's history I knew nothing about. And that's one of the reasons I love historical fiction, because a well-researched work of historical fiction can bring light to such interesting and important seasons of our past. We chatted about how Jennifer does research, how she weaves in elements of faith, and how she views her writing as a ministry to a wide variety of readers. I adored talking with Jennifer. I instantly felt like we were friends, and I think you'll quickly love her too. Let's listen in. Hello, Steady On community, and welcome into this fiction focus bonus episode. I'm Angie Bauman, and with me is Christian fiction author Jennifer L. Wright. Jennifer, welcome to the Steady On community.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We love historical fiction here. We love it. And I just want to ask right off the bat, what do you love about historical fiction? This is your second book, if I remember right. Like Come Down Somewhere is the name, set during World War II. I think historical fiction is daunting because you want to get that right. And so what draws you to it? Why historical fiction?
Well, I just think there is so much more we can grasp about history through historical fiction than, say, just a textbook. Um, it's one thing to have dates and figures and names and places, but when you're experiencing the past through the eyes of someone who lived it, even if that person is fictional, it personalizes it in a way that no other medium can. The best historical fiction is rooted in fact, of course. You take actual historical facts and you put your fictional characters there, and it just makes history come alive.
Yeah. So how do you decide? Your first book was set in the Dust Bowl, and this one's World War II. How do you decide where to start?
I might be a little different from other authors in that I actually always start with a time period. My background is in journalism. So, for example, If It Rains came about because we moved to New Mexico and I saw a dust storm and I thought, well, that's really interesting. And it kind of led me down a rabbit hole of research, went from dust storms to the Dust Bowl, and then the story came. As far as Come Down Somewhere, where I live in southern New Mexico is less than 100 miles from where they tested the atomic weapon, the Trinity site. So moving here, it's very much a part of the culture here. It's part of the history. A lot of people have forgotten about it, but the people that live here have not. And so moving here, again, I got really interested in that side of history because it's living history here. So started again going down that rabbit hole of Trinity site research, and the story was born from the time period. So I always start with a time period first, just something that happens to pique my interest, and then eventually a narrative forms out of that background research.
I love that. I like what you just said, that a lot of people have forgotten, but the people living here have not. And I think one of the things that historical fiction does, I like reading historical fiction, but I also like reading true stories about
Yes.
things in history that I didn't know anything about, right?
Yes.
Like I think it kind of can do the same thing. And I read something and I think, I had no idea. And so I don't know anything about like this place where you live and this bomb testing and stuff. Would you just talk a little bit about that from the research that you've done? Just educate us just a little bit. What is that?
Well, it's the bomb was tested. They chose, obviously, it was built up in Los Alamos, top secret lab, which is in northern New Mexico. When they were getting ready to test it, they needed a site that was relatively uninhabited, because again, this was the first weapon of its kind, and they chose a region down here in southern New Mexico because it is so sparsely populated. But they didn't tell anybody about it. Obviously, secrecy was a huge thing, not only from the Nazis, but also from our quote unquote allies, the Russians. We were very secretive about it. So the people that lived here in Alamogordo in these small ranching communities had no idea that this was going to happen. When it did happen in July of 1945, they were told that, oh, it was a munitions explosion over at the airbase, because there was an airbase here. So even after it happened, there continued to be this veil of secrecy about it. And I'm not saying that that was a good thing or a bad thing. I understand it was wartime and it was necessary, but the people down here were unaware of the danger that had just occurred in their backyard. The fallout itself wasn't so terrible because the cloud did drift away from the towns, but it was falling. It contaminated the land and their livestock because this was at an age when most people around here were ranching. They lived off the land. And so a lot of their drinking water, a lot of their animals, a lot of their crops were poisoned by this test that they knew nothing about. And so that was one thing that led me to it, is when I talk about it being living history here, that these people generations later are still living with the side effects of this. And a lot of atomic weapon testing afterwards took place in Nevada. The people that live near those testing sites have been compensated by the government for the side effects. The people that live here in the Tularosa Basin have not been.
Why? Do you know why the difference?
I don't know. I
Okay.
know it's the last that I saw, they are in Congress. There's an active committee that's petitioning for it and struggling to get it, but for some reason they have just never been compensated for the side effects that occurred in their backyard.
Interesting. Did we know what it would do? Do you know if we knew what it would do to the land and the water?
We did not.
Okay.
Actually, the title of my novel, Come Down Somewhere, came from a scientist who
Okay.
was there, who worked on the bomb, who sent it up into the air, and he said, we sent the bomb up into the air and we forgot that it had to come down somewhere.
Interesting. Interesting. So
Yeah.
without giving the spoilers away, will you give us just how do your characters interact with this testing or the effects of the testing? Will you just give us an overview of how you
Sh-
wove that together?
Sure. So it's a dual timeline story. So I have two main characters. The first story takes place in 1945, and it centers around a girl named Olive, whose family was, I use the word, kicked off their ranch. They were compensated, but that was to build the testing site. The government enacted something called eminent domain, which allowed them to seize land needed for the testing site. So this was a real thing that happened. Many ranchers lost their land. Some of them haven't ever gotten them back.
Wow.
But Olive's family, fictional Olive, was one of the families who lost their ranch. So she had to move away. So she's very bitter about it. She wants to help the war effort, but it kind of just seems like she's getting pushed away. And she knows that something's happening to her home out in the desert, but she has no idea what. And then the story flashes forward to 1953, where we see Joe Hawthorne. Joe Hawthorne's father worked on the test. So this is after everything has come out and we know what it was. We're starting to understand the side effects of it. And it's her grappling with, my father was a part of this, and how does that make me feel?
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
interweaves their two stories from before the test and after the
Okay.
test.
Okay. So what's it like when you're researching? Are you researching while you're writing? Do you do a bunch of research before you write? What does that look like in your process? I think everybody probably does it a little uniquely. So what's that
Right,
like for
right.
you?
I do almost 6 months of research usually before I ever start writing. Because as I mentioned before, my narrative usually comes from my research. I start with something. So I was interested in the Trinity test. Well, what happened before the Trinity test? What happened after the Trinity test? So I'm doing this, and then little nuggets start kind of falling into place. And usually, what I'll do is I'll have an outline of a story and I'll have it corresponding to a book. So while I do the bulk of the research before I write, I've broken it down into chapters, and I will also continuously be researching as I'm writing, because I'll come across something and say, well, wait, what was
How
that?
would
I
that
got to
have
go
worked
look.
or whatever? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
little bit of both at the same time.
Yeah. Did you have some help along the way from people who either were there or have that know a lot about it that you could ask questions?
Yes, we have a wonderful historical society here in town. They have a ton of things that they were able to hand me, all kinds of literature. They have stuff on display. What was it? In October, I was actually able to visit the Trinity site itself. So I was able to go and stand right there where the bomb went off, which was a very humbling experience. And then I believe it was in April, just a few months ago, two gentlemen from Alamogordo whose fathers worked on the project made a film that they brought here to town. And debuted, and I was able to go and watch that. And it was kind of home movie type stuff, which was really, really cool to see.
I bet that was. It probably just brought
Yeah,
your characters and everything to life in a whole different way, right?
for sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Makes you
yeah.
realize these were, although Olive and Joe are fictional, these were real people.
These were
This
real
was a real thing that
people,
happened.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and their story may be fiction, but they represent the truth. I mean,
Yes.
yes, if you've done your research
Yes.
well, their feelings may not be exactly, but we can identify with the angst of the situation because we get
Right.
to know the characters that you have written. So yeah,
Yes. And that
yeah.
was one of the things that was very tricky about writing it, is because my husband's in the military. I am a military spouse, and so when you think about the Trinity test, it's a very complex thing. It's, was it necessary? Did it do some good? Were there bad? Yes. I mean, there's definitely good and bad. And so I want it to be very balanced about, yes, because I've been to Hiroshima as well. I've seen what remains of, the city is of course rebuilt, but there is some remains of the destruction. I've went to the museum there and saw the Japanese film about, they'll tell you we were not going to surrender without this bomb. They flat out tell you that. And so, do I think it saved lives, but it also cost lives? And so, I'm trying to be very balanced about weighing both sides of that story, because I understand it's such a complex issue.
Mhm.
So, I tried to balance both of those sides with Olive and Joe, recognizing that there's two sides to the story, and it was not 100% bad, but it was not 100% good either.
Yeah. Isn't that the tension that we live in so many of our
Yes.
stories, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
For
yeah.
sure.
So, how do you, as a Christian fiction author, then how do you begin to incorporate God and your faith, and maybe your character's faith in the life of this story?
Well, each character or each story, I think, tends to weave its own faith theme throughout it. As far as Come Down Somewhere, I think when I was doing my research, one of the most fascinating things that I found, even the scientists, as they were building the bomb, were worried and fearful about how they were, quote unquote, playing God. They definitely had that unsettled feeling about it. And so for me, that seemed to be a theme that wove its way very naturally through the story. Most of us are never going to build weapons of mass destruction, I hope. But there are times in all of our lives when we make ourselves God, when we choose things, we choose ourselves over God's way.
Yeah.
And it always ends up hurting ourselves, and it almost always ends up hurting other people. And so that was a theme that I tried to explore on a larger scale with the Trinity test, but also on a smaller scale in the relationships within the novel.
I, as you were saying that, it kind of like I felt the Holy Spirit just moving in me, because aren't we all? We all have the ability to create a weapon of mass
Yes.
destruction. I
Yes.
feel the tears in my eyes because I know there have been times when I've been that in my marriage. I've been that in my parenting. I've been
Mm-hmm.
that in my friendships, because of pain or because of something else. Then I didn't want to surrender that to God. So I'll make my
Right.
own way. I mean, it's just, this
Yes.
story that you're saying is that on a larger scale, larger,
Right.
I guess. And,
Yes.
it's just a different way that plays
Mm-hmm.
out where and then we wrestle with those consequences again. A lot of it, it's self-protecting, or it's intended. We didn't know that would happen. We didn't know it would
Right.
go that far, whatever the case may
Right.
be. But then we are there in a place where there's
Right.
damage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I can really
Yeah.
appreciate that. So I talked to a lot of Christian fiction authors, and I would just be interested in your opinion about this. What makes a work of fiction Christian? Because there's a lot of things in the Christian fiction genre, if you will, that isn't necessarily heavy with like
Mm-hmm.
gospel or Jesus conversations, or you know what I'm saying, right? Like it's
Right.
not like necessarily
Right.
heavy with that. And so, but it's also clean reading or value, maybe faith-based reading. So I'm just curious about kind of as you go into that, and as you say, I'm a Christian fiction author, what makes it so for you?
It's funny that you bring that up, because I was actually, on a whole, I don't normally read reviews for my own books, but I happened to stumble across some, and side by side there was one negative review that it wasn't Christian enough, and another one that it was too Christian.
You can't make
So
anyone happy.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
just
Yeah.
can't. I can't make it happy. And
Yeah.
and so, I think for me personally, Christian fiction, first and foremost, it needs to be based on a biblical worldview. I think we absolutely live in a culture and in a society that does not have a biblical worldview. And so, before anything else, even if the story makes no mention of God, it needs to have that foundational purpose. But for me personally, I I kind of tend to straddle the line between trying to appeal to a wide audience. I obviously, my work, I want it to appeal to Christians. I hope they can be encouraged by it and furthered in their walk, but I also want it to appeal to non-Christians. I want someone who has maybe never considered reading a Christian fiction book because they're not a Christian to be able to pick it up and just be able to plant those little seeds where they start thinking, I never thought about God like that, or I never thought about following Jesus that way. And for me, I view it as a ministry. I know that there are some authors who say, nope, I just want to straight cater to Christians. And so it's going to be very, very heavy on the gospel and it's going to be very heavy and Jesus focused. I try to have a balancing act where I appeal to both because my goal is I want to encourage Christians in their walk with Jesus. But if you're not a Christian, I want to try to encourage you to maybe take that first step with
Mm.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a need for both types of Christian fiction.
Yeah, I like that. I appreciate your answer around that. I was thinking when you were talking about how it says God, I think about the book of Esther in the Bible that, that
Right,
does not mention God. And yet,
right.
I mean, that's one of my favorite books. It's taught me so much. Hey, friend, I'm cutting in here to let you know about a new resource I'm calling Steady Steps, where I'll be offering personalized guidance for your spiritual practices. Sometimes we feel alone in this Christian walk. No, we're not alone, but it can certainly feel that way. Maybe we are part of a faith community, but we still lack a connected relationship with someone who can sit with us and listen to us and offer things that will help us increase our intentionality in our walk with Jesus. In nearly 20 years of pastoral ministry and Bible teaching, I've enjoyed lunch or tea with dozens of women who share with me that they want more in their relationship with Jesus, but don't know the next steps to take. It has been and is my joy to offer practical tips for a deeper connection with Him by sharing pieces of my journey and spiritual disciplines that work for me. We can't sit at my local Panera and chat, I know that, but I can invite you into a Zoom room for a free 15-minute call. Together, we'll evaluate your spiritual habits and practices to decide what is and isn't helping you connect with Jesus based on the fundamentals of a Christian walk. In our time together, I will create a safe space for you to assess your current relationship with Jesus, decide what you want moving forward, and to take those next steady steps. Experiencing a deep connection with Jesus holds the extraordinary gifts of freedom and healing and comfort and hope. Christ offers that to you. He offers that to all of us, and we only need to dedicate ourselves to knowing Him more. I would love to help you develop a personalized plan to spend time with the one who calls you by name and claims you as His own. That's Isaiah 43:1. I hope that you will click the link in today's show notes to learn more. And now, back to the show. The ways that I feel like when I'm reading Christian fiction, if you will, is like the relationships are honoring at a different level than some
Right.
things. I think that like those biblical views, if you will, are evident in how people relate to each other, and
Right.
and I think
Right.
that's so encouraging to us because a lot of things that you pick up and read, it's not like that,
Right.
and I think that's a really important part of Christian fiction.
Yes, I agree with you 100% there.
Yeah, yeah. What is special to you about writing coming of age stories? I think both of your books are sort of a coming of age
Mhm.
story, right? And so what is that?
Yes.
Is there something about that you particularly like writing, or was that time of your life particularly special to you? Would you talk about that for a few minutes?
Well, I just think it's, I can only speak for myself, but I think there are maybe personality traits or things about me today that I can directly trace back to that time in my life. It's such a transformative age where you're becoming your own person, you're discovering things, you have that independence. And I think that lends itself a lot to a faith story as well. Because even if you were raised in a Christian home, there's that moment when am I going to just borrow my parents' faith or am I going to have my own faith? And
Exactly.
that usually comes during the coming of age time. Now, when you pair that with a major historical event, say the Dust Bowl or the Trinity test, I think there's something very unique when you have such a substantial event occurring at a vulnerable age. And I like pairing those two things together and just seeing where the story takes it. Because maybe not all of us came of age during World War II, but there was always some world event that I think almost all of us can look back and say, wow, that changed me.
Yeah.
I look back at my own time. I would say I came of age around September 11th. That fundamentally changed our world. It definitely shaped me as a person. And I think we can all see those big world events and how they changed us, especially if we were at that specific age where we were just coming into adulthood.
Yeah. With what is going on in the world, it helps us decide how we think about the world. Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Exactly. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there pieces of Jennifer in Olive?
Yes, for sure. That a lot of people have drawn parallels between Olive and Catherine. Catherine is one of my protagonists, and If It Rains, they're a little bit stubborn and hard-headed and outspoken. And I would say that was me when I was around that age. I was stubborn as a mule, as my dad would say. And so I'm not completely 100% either one of them, but there are definite aspects of their personalities that are me. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that in your writing a lot where you see yourself in your characters, men and women that you're writing about?
I think it's almost impossible for an author not to do that. You might not be completely 100% a certain character, but you're always going to have snippets of yourself in every single person you write because you are writing it. And what's funny is a lot of times you don't even notice it. There were some things that I put in a couple characters in If It Rains that I didn't think anything about. And my sister-in-law said, "Oh, I recognize this about you," and I was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah." So it's almost an unconscious thing that you
Yeah.
do as a writer. You do put a little bit of yourself in each character you write.
Yeah. I wonder, I hear authors talk about sometimes as they were writing, their characters did something that surprised them. Is that something you
Mhm.
experienced too? Whereas you're writing, you're like, I didn't see this turn that it was taking, but here I am and the words are coming and this is what's happening and I don't know what to do with it.
Not really.
Not
I
so
I
much.
am a I am a very hardcore planner when I
Gotcha.
write. When I sit down, I know exactly what that character is going to do.
It
I
is
am
plotted
like,
out before you
y-
start the words, huh?
oh
Yes.
yes, and I'm like, you will do what I say you're going to do. So,
Pity the book, the character that comes up in one of your books that is going to surprise you in the
uh,
future. There,
yes, I
think
don't
she
know that I
might
will
be
handle
coming.
that. I don't know that I'll handle that too well. So,
I just love it. I love it. I love it.
yeah.
So tell me, as you're writing, maybe this project in particular, is there a Bible verse or character or passage that's been really important to you as you've maybe done this research, something the Lord is, or just maybe something for your life that you kind of cling to and you're like, oh no, this is really important to me right now for this project or this season?
Yeah, I won't give any spoilers away, but in the story, there is a stained glass window that the girls come across in a church, and it's Jesus, and he's surrounded by vines, and it says, "Abide in me."
Mm.
And that verse is tantamount to the story. Um, because a lot of the story is focused on finding meaning in our life, finding our purpose, finding what we're supposed to do. And, in the verse, Jesus tells us that we can't do anything without him. We have to remain in him. So I wanted to explore, what does that look like as a character? What does it look like to go off on your own and try to find your purpose without Jesus? What does it look like when you do abide in him, and how successful your pursuits are? But that also, during my writing process, I have to remind myself of that. Sometimes the process of writing a book can be completely overwhelming. It's a very solitary endeavor. You're just sitting at your computer, it's just you and your screen. You can get a lot of insecurity, a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of that imposter syndrome where you think, I'm not a writer, I can't do this. And I can always tell when I'm starting to feel that it's because I'm not abiding in Jesus. I'm not letting him guide my words, guide my day, guide my writing, guide what I need to be doing. So I need to constantly be reminding myself, I need to just abide in Jesus, stay in step with him, write what I feel he's leading me to write, and leave it at that.
Mm. That's so well said, but I find it so hard to do.
Yes.
I do. I really do. You know, I have this practice now. For some months now, I have checked my numbers, if you will. And those who are in Christian communicator or listening, they're like, they know what I'm talking about. But, you know, you have all these things, all these numbers and downloads and follows and all this stuff, and the percentage of open of your newsletter, and everything has a
Right.
stat, you know, and
Yes.
I felt like the numbers were like coming at me all the time. And some time ago, I decided I set aside time on Monday morning. I keep this little spreadsheet because I like, it's kind of important to know, you know?
Right.
And so, and I record all my numbers, and then I do not look at them again for that week, you know? And that, like,
Yes.
that was a game changer for me, because I found
Yes.
myself doing what you're talking about, like living and dying by the numbers.
Right.
And if the numbers were up, then I was doing good work. And if the numbers were
Right.
down, you know, and the
Right.
Lord was really like, you know, it's okay to look at these, because you do want to like evaluate your effectiveness, or what, like you're saying,
Right.
it matters if you sell books, it does.
Right.
But really what matters is, are we living and writing and whatever we're doing, creating from our overflow of our connection with him? That's what's really going to matter to us.
That is exactly right. And it goes back to what I was talking about with the reviews. You know, I had one review
Yeah.
saying that it was too Christian, and another saying this is not Christian at all. And so I can't go by, there is constructive criticism. I will agree with
Yes.
that. But when it comes down to it, I just have to write what the Lord lays on my
Yes.
heart to write, and trust that He's going to put it in the hands of the people that will appreciate it and need to hear it.
Yeah, yeah. I had a mentor one time encourage me to evaluate if criticism or, you know, review,
Mhm.
what do you receive and what do you not receive? Like, a lot of times there's a nugget of truth. I can learn something
Yes.
from this, you know.
Hmm.
And sometimes, I mean, every once in a while it's just no, nothing. I mean, that's
Right.
just, person is just angry, right?
Right.
You know, whatever.
Yes.
But a lot of times, the majority of it, you need to let it go. It's not really
Right.
anything that you actually need to make any
Hmm.
adjustments or whatever. So good for you
Yes.
to stay in that battle, because I think it is a battle for all of us. Yeah,
Oh, for
yeah.
sure.
So
Yes.
I have like kind of an unrelated question to ask you. And for
Okay.
those who are listening, not watching, Jennifer is sitting in a very professional office with lovely bookshelves that are filled with very professional looking books. But I believe I see a pretty aggressive Funko collection behind you. Is
Yes.
that true?
Yes. Yes.
What are the significance of the Funkos in your very professional writing space there that you have? I love it.
I try to keep it under control. The ones that
However,
I have are just The Office. I am a huge Office fan.
I love
It
it.
is one of those things, it just consistently makes me laugh.
Yeah.
You know, if I've had a really terrible day, even if I've seen the episode 100 times, I can put it on and it just makes me laugh. So, with all of these books, a lot of them are research books. I have some of my own books up there. It's a reminder to me to, like, sometimes you just got to laugh. Don't take yourself
Exhale.
too
Yeah.
seriously. Like, just look at your funny little Funkos of Kevin over there with his pot of chili and just take a break and laugh. So,
Both my husband and especially my older son are really big Office fans. And so,
yes,
I appreciate that through them. Then, yeah, that's
yes,
great. That's great. Well, thank you for, letting us in on
of
that. So,
course.
this has been so fantastic. I have loved talking to you today. Before I let you go, I always ask my guests this question because I love to share resources. And of course, we're going to link your book and all that kind of good stuff. But
Okay.
what else? What's helping you abide right now, Jennifer? What is anything that you are watching, listening, reading, studying, anything at all that's just keeping you connected to the Lord?
Well, I am currently focused on going through the entire Bible. I did like one of the 1 year Bible reading
Mm-hmm.
plans a few years ago, but I felt very, very rushed through
Mm-hmm.
it because, you know, you have to do so many chapters a day. I have decided to just do one chapter a day. I read a chapter, I find one specific verse that speaks to me. If I don't understand it, you know, I'll look it up and try to get some context. I will meditate, I will pray on it. And that's what I'm doing. I know it's going to take me several years to go through this, but for me, going through it slowly and just focusing each chapter verse by verse has been eye opening as far as connecting me to the Lord. I really enjoy apologetics. I study a lot of apologetics just because I do think, as a mother, I have two kids. We're raising them in a world that's increasingly hostile to Christianity. And it's very important for me that my kids be able to defend their faith as they get older, that they understand that, as I was talking about earlier, they're not just borrowing my faith. I want them to understand why I believe what I believe, and I want them to be able to see the logical reasons behind it because I believe Christianity can stand up to questions. So, But I realized if I'm going to teach them to defend my faith, I need to know how to defend my faith as well. So I tried to sprinkle some apologetics books in, and I'm currently reading Confronting Christianity by Rebecca McLaughlin. It's 12 questions that atheists or non-believers will put to Christians and how you can answer them. And I'm finding it very, very informative.
Good, good. We appreciate that resource. That's
Hmm.
really helpful. Yeah, I struggle with that myself a
Hmm.
little bit because I am I'm not a competitive person, and I don't like to
Right,
argue or debate, and
right,
so I'll shy away from those
right.
conversations. But the reality is, I have those answers.
Yeah,
If we are abiding with the Lord, we do have the answers, and we
right,
can help our
right.
children have the
Hmm.
answers, because we don't need to shy away from saying
Right,
this is what I know to be true. This is how I've
right.
experienced God. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that encouragement today.
Of
So
course, yeah,
yeah.
because I do believe that Christianity is true and it can stand up to any question you throw at it.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
don't want my kids to be afraid if someone comes up to them and asks them a
Mhm.
question. I don't want it to rattle their faith. I want them to be
Yes.
prepared that, hey, someone might ask you this
Yes.
question.
hmm
Here's the answer to
Here's
it.
the answer.
So,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I need
Yeah.
to have
Good.
those answers as
hmm
well if I'm going
hmm
to instill them in my children.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good, good, good. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for serving
Yes,
us,
thank
for
you.
sharing a little bit about your book. Jennifer can be found, by the way, I love your website name. She's at Jen Wright Writes, and I
Yes.
will link that in the show notes so you don't have to worry about how to spell it. But Jen Wright
Yes.
Writes, her new book is Come Down Somewhere, which drops this week, the same week as the podcast, right? September 6th. Is that
September
when is
6th.
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
Yes.
is the release date. And so just a
Yes.
couple of days ago from when this podcast is dropping, if you happen to be listening to it live. And all the best with the launch of this book into the world. And I
Thank
will put
you.
your book and the website, all the places to find and follow Jennifer can be found in today's show notes. And we're just so grateful for your time today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And friend, thank you for listening. Until next time, peace. Thank you again, Jennifer, for visiting with us today and for sharing not only your new book, but your heart behind the project as well. Jennifer's books are available wherever books are sold, and you will find her website and all the places to find and follow her in today's show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.